Luck is like a weird, unpopular restaurant full of funny little waiters who bring you things you never ordered and don't always like lemony snicket. I enjoyed a coffee and a pastry in the courtyard of the Brasserie d'Arenas next to Place Voltaire in Arles. Buster lay at my feet, as always. It was late March in Provence, and the gray skies and light rain suited my mood perfectly. The rain got heavier, and I started to get wet. So I moved the chair back under the two tall plane trees, pulling the table with me. The noise woke Buster. He raised his head and looked around. Seeing nothing, he lay down again, resting his chin on his paws, muttering, "It's raining," as if I didn't know it. It was one of those days, so I tossed a couple of €2 coins onto the table and headed up the Rue de l'Amphitheatre to my rented apartment. Up is the key word in Arles. The streets rise from the river to the old Roman Colosseum, which stands on a hill as if dropped from a time loop. The stones in the street were becoming slippery, and the gutters in the middle of the narrow medieval street were gurgling as I approached my building on Rue Ursulines. I opened the door with difficulty. The old-fashioned skeleton key was complex because the lock must have dated from the Belle Epoque. Buster sat there with rain dripping from his battle ear wounds. My friend looked unhappy, but he was as calm and patient as always. He was basically a dog de Bordeaux, if you don't know what that is. Think Turner and Hooch, so it's huge and scary, but he had a kind and gentle soul. We met a couple of months ago at the street cafe Le Criquet on Rue Porte de Laura. Buster was working at the tables in the alley next to the building. I love dogs, so I tossed him a piece of my cheese snack. He caught it mid-air, displaying an impressive set of jaws and fangs. Then he said, "Merci, monsieur. Perhaps you have anything else for the poor, hungry dog." Some of you don't know what dogs say, and I feel sorry for you. But like most people, I know. So I ordered my new friend a plate of assorted sausages. The old man lived on the street after the death of his owner, so I had to offer him the hospitality of my humble abode, a one-room apartment above a liquor store on a narrow cobblestone street. The apartment was small and my friend was a bit smelly, but loneliness is always a problem for people like me, and anyone with a dog is never lonely. Buster was a friend. Seriously, he gave me loyalty and companionship that more than made up for any minor inconveniences he might have caused. We spent each day at the lazy pace of the long Provençal summer, sitting in street cafes and discussing the lives we had lived. To be honest, I was the only one talking, but Buster was a great and completely non-judgmental listener. He lay there in the warm, peaceful evenings, puffing and drooling while I philosophized. It's incredible how much insight a bottle of Pernod pasties can inspire. I could almost hear him say, "I agree, my friend. Man's life is difficult, but the only choice is to march or die, and I choose to march." These were exactly the same thoughts I had. Now I was the master of my destiny. Maybe my mother once took care of me, but I'm too old to go back to the womb, and my friends probably felt pity or schadenfreude, as it sometimes happens as long as it didn't affect them. However, for me, life is like crossing a busy highway blindfolded. You move on without thinking until you get hit by a Peterbilt. It was a beautiful warm autumn evening. Insects were chirping in the lush bushes, and the smell of burning leaves was in the air. I was full of myself as I strolled through the courtyard, heading towards the Wigglesworth Tunnel and the 1889 gate. College teaching is hard to beat. You get paid to do what you do for free, read and think about exciting things. The open-ended contract system provides you with job security. All you have to do is attend your classes, do your research, and publish. The publishing part is a real struggle, as it is the currency in academia. But if you have a few good ideas, you can make a name for yourself, and name recognition generates interest. This is a self-sustaining system. People know you and read you, which generates more interest and therefore more posts. On the other hand, I'm not exactly normal, at least not by normal standards. Most people get pleasure from deceiving their neighbor. Money and power are seized. I am different. I don't consider glasses to be worldly things, because I'm a nerd and nerds live in their heads. You muggles may perceive me as an antisocial geek. I would think so if I were you. But thinking about the unthinkable requires bandwidth, and buying people who can do it costs money. A lot of money. Honestly, I would never tell my employer that I was doing this for free, because I have expensive tastes. At that moment, I was going to meet my wife in Tat. Sally, or Sal as I call her, works at the High School of Arts and Sciences, which is located across Massachusetts Avenue. She works longer than me, and Tate is right around the corner from her office. There is coffee and delicious pastries, so it was a logical place to meet and walk to the MBTA. I was finishing my latte when Sal stormed in. We've been married for 12 years, but she still seems excited when she sees me. Sociologists call our marriage binary. We are so emotionally connected that we don't need, or even want, the company of other people. We sometimes hung out with friends, but honestly, the rest of the world can go to hell as long as we have each other. How we met and got married doesn't matter. Sal is smart, and like most smart people, has a strong character, so she quickly loses patience with people who can't keep up. I can, and this is where we find common ground. Before we met, Sal's relationships with boys had left her cynical. This cynicism was mainly due to the fact that every guy she dated first wanted to lift her dress. Of course, this is understandable since Sally is way off the attractiveness scale. My wife is about 5 feet 2 inches tall with thick, dark brown hair that falls in wavy cascades just below her shoulders. She has huge dark brown eyes that make her look like an erotic lemur. And like most extremely smart women, Sally is a true artist behind closed doors. We've been together for a long time, and she still takes our breath away. Today, she was wearing her usual clothes, a plaid wrap skirt with gorgeous bare legs peeking out from underneath, and a blue cashmere V-neck sweater over a button-down shirt. My wife may be a cool academic woman, but she's not wearing enough loose clothing to hide her basic sexuality. Sally is dark and sensually beautiful, but there are many such women. The key to her attractiveness is the way she carries herself. My wife walks around with something special that just oozes seductiveness, so she attracted every man's attention as she made her way towards me and kissed me tenderly on the forehead. She said happily, "I succeeded, baby," I said, standing up. "Great. I'll order you a latte, and you can tell me how you did it." Sally was sitting at a small table playing with her phone when I returned. She said excitedly, "You won't believe what just happened." I said, "Enlighten me." Sal said, "You know, the annual meeting at Wyndhurst." I was vaguely aware of this. It was a place where high-ranking officials of the central administration gathered to plan lofty things for the future. It was actually a Berkshire wine and cheese night put on by big donors to convince the university to do what they wanted. There was a lot of networking among the great and the good, with several information sessions held by various academic departments. These meetings were basically PR shows to raise funds from donors. Sally's school was apparently in line. I said, "What's the matter? Are you going to be one of the dean's office representatives?" My wife has an MBA from MIT. She is involved in long-term capital planning for the School of Arts and Sciences. Sal said casually, "Millie and I will support Dean Fuller in the presentation of our Classical Studies Research Center." Millie was her best friend. Lawton Fuller was Sal's boss. He was not the real dean of the college. Technically, he was the associate dean of planning and finance. I said, well done. When's the big event?" I knew it wouldn't happen right away. Wyndhurst was the place to go for the peak paint season, which was still a couple of weeks away. People contributing at least 6 figures to the fund love to look at the leaves in style. She said, "Oh, it won't be any time soon." Lawton assured me that I'll get a lot of visibility with the right people. Of course, we won't be talking to the president or donors, but we're the only ones making the presentation. Her tone was strange. I never liked Lawton Fuller, but of course we were two different species. I'm a laid-back joker who wants to make everything seem easy. It's a duck analogy. I want to appear to be swimming calmly on a pond, even if my little webbed feet are frantically paddling to make it happen. Fuller, on the other hand, was the self-proclaimed king of hardball. Are you really asking me? Who would make a conscious effort to call themselves a professional asshole? Lawton Fuller. No doubt because the man was a completely insecure and narcissistic bully. Such people use personal aggression as a weapon to protect their fragile ego. But I digress. My point was that we were complete opposites. The contrast was obvious when you looked at us. I'm tall, with a long face, gray eyes, and unruly brown hair, while Fuller is short and muscular, extremely handsome, perfectly groomed and stylishly dressed. I'm a sweater and jeans guy. Fuller looks like he just stepped out of a polo ad shoot. This asshole was 6 years older than Sal and me and had 2 kids. His wife, Betsy, was a blue-blooded princess from the right-back Bay family, petite, ephemerally beautiful, and a real asset to any gathering of the right people. Sal and I were mid-30s with no children and definitely not Boston Brahmins. At least Sal had blue blood roots. But she was the first generation of the rich, and not born into the estate. I was too clearly brought up on the wrong side of the tracks. I needed grants and scholarships on my way to a doctorate, with hands worn out from working in the kitchens of the nobility. But I see the world differently. I have the gift of words, and I am a natural actor. This always puts you in a good position in an academic environment. Sometimes we had to communicate with Fuller. Of course I had to. He's Sal's boss. During these times, Sal kept a tight leash on me, because Fuller couldn't hide his contempt for me, and I tend to get irritable around narcissistic jerks. However, I didn't want to ruin my wife's career, so I kept it civilized. This meant I didn't hit Fuller in the throat like I wanted. However, it didn't matter. Sal looked like a Labrador who had just returned with a duck in her mouth. I knew better than to scratch her behind the ears because our designer sofa is an uncomfortable place to sleep. I said hopefully, if you spend 3 days in luxury, will any husbands be invited? My wife said sharply, this is a work weekend. I can't be distracted by keeping you busy. This is an important opportunity and I need to focus. She was right. Academic freedom protects emotional weirdos like me. Maybe that's why there are so many conflicted weirdos in colleges. And I was famous for not suffering fools, starting with her boss. So I said, in that case, what do you want for dinner? She laughed at the abrupt change of topic. But I needed to let her know that I fully support her. What better way to do this than by feeding her? Abby is around the corner from our house and offers a great selection of gourmet sandwiches. Sal sat across from me, holding a glass of Cabernet, looking dark and sensually beautiful. I have no idea how she does it, but even after a full day of work, she radiates sexiness. Seriously, my wife dresses like a graduate of Mount Holyoke and Sloan School, not like a woman of easy virtue. But she has a subconscious factor that makes the hormones boil in any man, including me. Some of this is her amazing body, narrow hips, and incredible dancer legs. But her dark skin color and huge, widely spaced, heavy eyelids radiate heat and passion. It's like she's always thinking about it. However, the problem for any guy who might try to woo Sal is that she is anything but easy to get. She is an intelligent and sincere woman who demands to be respected, and I saw her extremely harshly rebuke anyone who tried to court her. So I had no doubt about her values. She was a woman who valued her personal honor. As for me, I was enjoying the exceptional sexual attention of a woman who turned out to be one of the hottest women in the world. Even better, she looked at me with that dreamy look she uses when she really wants to. Something turned her on. We quickly finished our meal and hurried home. Before we even walked through the door, we made love. Lying there, with her hair disheveled, Sal slowly opened her huge, intelligent eyes and looked at me with a penetrating gaze. She said, in a voice filled with passion, I love you, Eric. I will always love you. My heart and soul belong to you. Never forget that. She didn't exaggerate or lie. A person's eyes are the windows to his soul, and I knew that she was telling the truth. This magnificent woman and I were committed to each other for a long time. It was truly a wonderful moment. Sal left for the Berkshires early on Friday. She was a ball of nervous energy as she packed her things. Naturally, she took with her more luggage than Napoleon's army on the march. I once asked her about this excess. She gently patted my cheek and said in a tone as if she were talking to a mentally retarded person, "You just don't understand women, honey. We mainly use public transport, but we have a Mini Cooper for car trips." My wife stood next to him as I loaded her luggage into the trunk. She looked like Joan of Arc ready to be burned at the stake. I opened my arms. She stepped into my arms and I said, "Don't worry, my love, you'll be a star." She gave me the same look Tom Brady must get on game day. Sal chose to live in the wild rather than in my ivory tower. Now everything depended on one big weekend. She said, "I hope so. This could make or break my career." Sal is very competitive, much more so than I am. Second place is never an option for her, and this weekend was clearly all about the money. If she succeeds, the next 10 years will be nothing short of promotion, perhaps even a deanship. But everything was on the line tomorrow. She honked twice as she headed west on Owife Parkway. I always thought the horn on such a stylish little car was a joke. This beep beep sounded like a yapping chihuahua. The electric blue paint helped me keep track of her for a while as she drove down Mass 23. Then I turned and went back inside. Without her, the place seemed empty. I then spent the entire day researching whether Vincent van Gogh actually committed suicide. Hey, I told you I was weird. I love historical detective mysteries, and spending an afternoon analyzing the Ripper murders is very relevant these days. Van Gogh, and I'm talking about the man himself. Not his art interested me because his story is as incredible as mine. I mean, here is a person who has experienced psychotic episodes most of his life. Seriously, does this look like a man who would become one of the most influential artists of the 19th century? I'm not crazy, mind you, or at least not officially. But no one would have predicted that I would end up where I am now. So I felt a kinship with this man. However, this is not the part about Van Gogh that captivated me. What really intrigued me was that he died thinking he was a failure. He did not sell many paintings during his lifetime. Now they're going for $15 million apiece. He probably wouldn't have committed suicide if he had known that. Vincent made his most iconic works in Arles. He liked the soft light and bright colors of Provence. I visited this area in my youth and felt the same way, so I've been thinking about going there on vacation for several years. But you know how it is with life. It is believed that Van Gogh committed suicide with a shot in the stomach. This was the generally accepted theory, but a controversial situation arose due to the lack of traces of gunpowder on his shirt. If it was murder, there were many candidates. The weapon with which he was shot belonged to a young man named Secredin. Vincent had a history with this guy involving a prostitute they both loved. The other main suspect was his brother's wife, Johanna. Vincent lived his entire life at the expense of his younger brother Theo. Consequently, it was rumored that Johanna traveled to Auvers-sur-Oise one day to relieve her husband of an expensive burden. There was even a theory that his own doctor killed him. Van Gogh behaved even crazier than when he cut off part of his left ear and gave it to a local woman of easy virtue. I bet she was delighted with this gift, so perhaps the good doctor decided to treat Vincent's increasing madness with a .30 caliber bullet. Anyway, I'm a nerd, and nerds love riddles. I think we enjoy mental exercise. More importantly, spending a day absorbed in Van Gogh's untimely death helped take my mind off my wife. She played in the Super Bowl of capitalism, so she will be involved in a whirlwind of handshakes and smiles from the moment she arrives. Sal was there to charm the rich old guys who fund our academic ventures. The fact that she was going to spend her time doing this without anyone other than her best friend Millie and douchebag for support was somewhat discouraging. But I knew my girl, and I was sure that she would be in her element, charming all those dirty old men and their pampered wives. It was as gorgeous a Saturday morning as a New England fall day could be. The trees in this green corner of the world were in their full autumn splendor. The temperature was in the low 70s, and the sun was shining brightly. So I called Millie's husband, Charlie, to see if he wanted to watch some Ivy League football. Millie was away with Sal and Dickhead this weekend, and I thought her husband Charlie would enjoy some company. So I was shocked when Millie answered the phone. Millie said hello several times. I finally said, "I thought you were in Windhurst this weekend." Millie said with ill-concealed anger, "That's what I thought, but Lawton called as I was getting ready to leave on Friday and said I didn't need to come. He said he and Sally could handle it themselves." I smelled a giant preppy rat. I said, stunned, "You mean Sally is there alone with Fuller?" Millie said, "Yeah, it was disappointing to be eliminated at the last minute. But what can you do? I'm sure Sal can handle it." I felt a little uncomfortable when she handed the phone to Charlie. Maybe I was naive. Charlie and I agreed to meet at the Russell House Tavern near the Harvard stop on the Red Line. We could walk 15 minutes to the stadium from there. I didn't have a car, but the MBTA was better because I could drink as much as I wanted after the game. Charlie is a big man, my height, but maybe 50 pounds heavier. The brilliant dark eyes peering out from his full beard make him look like a grizzly bear. He's also nothing like me, big and always full of fun. He is a great companion. However, what I just heard from Millie bothered me so much that I was somewhat distracted while the Crimson dealt with the poor leopards from Lafayette. He and I were having a beer at the Russell when I casually asked, "How did Millie take her exclusion from the Wyndham project?" Charlie is an odd duck. He looks like he could play football for Harvard as a defensive lineman if they were allowed to have bushy red beards. But he is actually a Presbyterian minister. He said, "How do you think she felt?" A typical advisor answers a question with a question. I said, "Based on how Sal would have reacted, I'm guessing Millie was disappointed and probably a little angry. These meetings are great networking opportunities. Why do you think Fuller canceled at the last minute?" He looked at me serenely and said, "I don't know. What do you think?" Again with vague answers. I said, "The only thing I can imagine is that Fuller wants to be alone with Sally this weekend." Charlie said, encouraging me to continue thinking, "And why do you think he wants this?" I thought for a moment, and it dawned on me. I said, "This asshole wants to try to have an affair with Sal." I added, "She's incredibly sexy and Fuller has always had a soft spot for her. It would make his life if he could turn me into a cuckold." Charlie said, "That's what I thought. Don't worry, though. Sal has a good head on her shoulders." I said firmly, "Yes, she has a good head and is focused on this opportunity. I just wish Millie could take advantage of it too." Charlie said casually, "She'll get over it. Millie isn't as competitive as Sally." Sal's strong drive to achieve was what bothered me. My wife was obsessed with success, so much so that she would do almost anything to achieve her goal. The contrast between her career and mine was one of those paradoxes that makes us a perfect couple. Each of us has an idea about our destiny. This vision makes us who we are. It is by it that we judge our progress in life. I never saw myself competing in my wife's world. It's not because I was weakling. I can be completely ruthless when it comes to the things that matter to me. I just had different ideas about what I wanted from life. I get paid to live in my own head rather than piracy on the high seas, which I think is the analogy of the business community. Therefore, I can always be a reliable support for Sal. My wife is a storm. She often tells me how much my calm presence means to her, to ground her when she gets overly emotional. But people can lose priorities while pursuing ambition. This left me some room to think. Sal called me late Saturday afternoon. This surprised me because I had assumed she was too busy praising herself to find the time. Her voice sounded a little timid, if that's the right word. She said casually, "I just wanted to let you know that I'll be staying somewhere else tonight." I said, surprised, "Okay, where?" Sal said, "At the Marriott Courtyard in Lenox." It was close to the event venue. I said, puzzled, "How did things go? Why did you move?" She said, a little nonchalantly, "Everything went well. I just wanted to get away from it all. I'll spend the night here and come home early tomorrow afternoon. Maybe we can do something together." I just wanted to tell you that I love you, Eric. It was a little unsettling. Sal is usually the first to arrive at a party and the last to leave. What made her so emotional, and what made her stay somewhere else? I said absent-mindedly, "That's great." Then I added, as if it were a last-minute thought, "Did Millie come with you?" Sal said, her voice sounding a little tense. "No, she didn't come on Friday. I don't know what happened to her. Lawton said she was sick. I'm not happy. That left me alone with Lawton." It was a test, of course, and Sal passed it with flying colors. "I'll wait until she gets home to tell her why Millie didn't come." I said casually, "Well, I'll see you when you get there. When are you coming back?" She said cautiously, "I'm not sure. Lawton wants to debrief tomorrow." I hoped that she would return early in the morning and we could do something together. "It's only a 2-hour drive from Lennox to Cambridge." I said, disappointed. "This sucks." "Well, just let me know when you leave." She said, "Sorry." There was something strange in her voice. She then added, "See you tomorrow and get ready for some good love." Sal called around noon on Sunday and didn't show up until 3 o'clock. She looked gloomy when she entered. My wife fumbled and then rolled her luggage into the bedroom. I followed her and threw it on the bench at the foot of the bed so she could unpack it. Sally turned to me, and I saw in her eyes that she wanted to say something. Then it disappeared. Instead, she stepped towards me, put her arm around my neck and said, "Would you like to throw something else on the bed? It's been a long, hard weekend." I looked into her deep, dark eyes and saw a lot of desire. Like I said, she thinks about it a lot. Sal weighs maybe 115 pounds, so I picked her up and threw her, laughing, into the middle of the bed. We had sex. I said, "Wow." She said weakly, "I must have missed you more than I thought." I said, "It was something else." She said, "Well, this is how it's going to be now." I wasn't sure I liked this prospect. It was a primal act of mating, not lovemaking, and that's not what our marriage was about. This raised a disturbing thought, but I couldn't realize what it was. But again, man plans, but God laughs. We returned to work the following Monday, Sal in a plaid wrap skirt and cinema plaque sweater, and me in my chambray work shirt and jeans. The trip passed with the usual exchange of jokes. For me, marriage is for life, so it's better to love the person you're going to spend all this time with. Sal was the best friend in the world, full of intelligence, wit, and fun. We split up when we arrived on campus. She went to college, and I headed to Maxwell Dworkin across Cambridge Street. I had a slightly longer walk, but I didn't stick to a strict schedule, and it's always a pleasure to walk around the yard at any time of year. The weather was perfect, and I was in a great mood. I planned to spend the day exploring the dark corners of the internet. I would feel safer walking through the markets of Mogadishu in reality. But you have to stay on top of things, and that's where all the activity happens. The first thing I did was check the messages. I don't like getting distracted by day-to-day activities when I'm in tour, and there's always that one student with a stupid question. There was a typical collection of spam in my inbox, one of which contained a link to a daily newsletter for employees. This newsletter was a source of gossip, updated by PR servants to make the university's top officials look good. Does anyone even read these things? So usually the first thing I did was delete the newsletter. But today it was headlined, "University Charts New Course for Wyndhurst." Well. This is something that needed to be studied. I was hoping to find something to tease Sal about. I knew she wouldn't have time because of work. The website contained mostly photos from the event. It was an ordinary collection of photographs designed to convey seriousness and goodwill. Of course, there were photos from the meetings and all the fun from the receptions. I zoomed in on the page to see if I could find Sal. The first shot showed her standing at the head of a table full of old white men with a PowerPoint presentation in the background. She looked amazing. The next time she appeared much further down the page. She stood with the group, holding a glass of champagne. She looked shy and a little drunk. The caption read, "Another successful day." My wife was wearing her sexiest little black dress. Sal's gorgeous breasts were lifted and pushed up under the strappy top. She was absolutely sizzling with her dark skin and wide-set, sensual eyes. She stood next to Fuller on the left. He looked at her seductive cleavage and grinned at the camera. But what really caught my attention was the guy standing to Sal's right. He was some 60-year-old plutocrat with a belly as big as his wallet and a smirk on his fat face. He had one hand resting on my wife's shoulder and his left hand hanging just above her delicious left breast. It seemed that he considered her his property. I checked the signature, then quickly did a "Who is?" He was Herbert J. Pullerman, Harvard class of 1985, CEO and major shareholder of Deep Harbor Holdings, a Fortune 50 company. I had no doubt that he was a major donor. I assumed that Sal had to endure some physical harassment from these horny bastards. The photos were in chronological order, and the party became increasingly boozy as I scrolled through the page. The next picture was of Fuller with his shirt sleeves rolled up, obviously drunk and grinning like an idiot. He was surrounded by a group of older women with the predatory appearance of a pack of velociraptors. This was an exclusive meeting, so perhaps they felt safe letting go of their gray hair. I kept scrolling. There were no more pictures of Fuller. Perhaps the ladies ate it. Then I thought I saw Sal's dress in the second-to-last photo. No other woman at the party wore such a little black dress. The old women mostly wore chiffon, so it had to be my wife. It was in the background of a shot of an older couple dancing together. The person taking the pictures must have been attracted to the two old men because of the way they danced. It was romantic, in an old way. The part of the photo that caught my attention was out of focus. It was in the lower right corner of the frame. No one could figure out what was going on unless they had a powerful way to enhance the image. Unfortunately, I had it. I uploaded a JPEG. Then I used my editing software to cut and enlarge the part with Sal. The image was pixelated to such an extent that it was even more difficult to understand what was happening. But I also had military-grade image enhancement software that the Pentagon uses with its keyhole satellites. The AI took 15 minutes to analyze, interpret, and render, but the result was crystal clear. Sally was lying on the sofa with Pullerman. My eyebrows shot up into my hair. Seriously, anyone who did that to my wife would be very sorry. It was dark where they were, and the party was almost over, leaving only a few people left. However, Sal would have to be completely out of her mind to do something so obvious. At least that explained her sudden change in mood when she got home. This also explained the move to another hotel. Acting like a prostitute in front of big shots was bad enough. But then Sal had to spend Saturday interacting with the guy she had just spent a night of passionate love with. She should have been humiliated. Of course, that didn't explain why she stayed until Sunday. I was sure she had her reasons. I wanted to hear them. I experienced every stage of grief in the hours I spent locked in my office, staring into space. First, there is denial. This couldn't happen. Then anger, that damn bitch, bargaining followed. Maybe I can live with this. Then depression, my life is over. Finally, acceptance came. It happened. I knew it happened, and now I had to deal with it. Honestly, I'm wrong. I'm human, after all. We are all a mixture of ego and desires, and none of us really understand what's going on around us. Therefore, we tolerate all sorts of terrible nonsense, simply because we do not connect action with intention, except as long as the consequences don't fall on you. Now my eyes were wide open, and everything was on me. I have always envied believers. At least they have confidence, me, although I agree that there is no other way to explain the universe other than a higher power. Honestly, I don't believe that whatever controls the cosmology, this being takes time out of his busy day to ask himself, how can I make Eric's life better? Therefore, I knew that I would have to cope with this without the help of the Almighty. However, I decide one thing. I'm a practical pragmatist. This is one of my saving graces, and I have pride maybe too much, but it's who I am. This way, there will be no whining about evil fate, no matter how much psychic energy it costs me. You are defined by your choices. so you have to choose to be strong. But power comes at a high price. Of course, you can always choose not to act. This is a weakness. Reacting to betrayal with tears and self-pity is simply humiliating and unmanly. It achieves nothing, and whining is simply disgraceful. For me, the only worthy path is immediate and purposeful action. Hence, I decided to be strong and focused. This will require deadly concentration, not useless self-pity. The obvious question was the hardest. Do you think you can live with this? Deep down, I knew the answer was no. It wasn't my ego talking, even if that feeling was reinforced by my wounded self-esteem. The essential point was that our special marriage bond was broken. Sexual intimacy connects two people in marriage. So, inevitably, this connection will disappear if one of the partners cheats. You can forgive, but you will never be able to restore the unique sense of unity of a couple. This is what I felt during lovemaking after Sal returned. This led to another obvious question. What's next? I knew I had a lonely mountain to climb, and it scared the crap out of me. First, I needed to know why Sal did this. If I wanted to retain even an ounce of sanity, I didn't believe she had a lover waiting in the wings, or that Pullerman was anything more than a casual fling. Therefore, the question was, what circumstances provoked her betrayal? I had proof that this happened. Consequently, I had no choice but to immediately discuss this with Sal. Otherwise, I would have spent the rest of my days calling myself a coward. I knew this conversation would be full of alienation and pain, so perhaps you can understand why I spent several hours thinking about the best way to approach this discussion. Our life together was perfect, and there was every reason to believe it would remain that way if I simply ignored what I knew. So why was I forced to destroy everything? It wasn't out of anger or jealousy. It was the belief that I would be betraying myself if I didn't do this. Honor requires certain obligations from a person. One of them is to never shy away when faced with the truth. This applies to both men and women. Okay then, how do I do this? I figured neither Sally nor I would want to appear vindictive. Therefore, I hoped that we could sort this out like two reasonable adults. Of course, the conversation would have been different if Sal had tried to lie, make excuses, or avoid answering. But I doubted it. We always treated each other with respect. My wife was waiting for me with 2 macchiatos and a loving smile. She was her usual edgy and energetic self. Crap, this will be harder than I thought. I sat down, trying not to give myself away. The last thing I wanted was a public scene. I didn't have to try because my wife didn't pay attention to me. She began enthusiastically, "You won't believe what happened today." I could have guessed, but I raised an eyebrow and made a gesture to continue. Sal said, "The Center for Classical Studies is fully funded. The money arrived in our account early this morning." I continued to watch instead of jumping to my feet in joy and dancing around the room with her. Sal didn't notice. Instead, she happily said, "We've received 26+ million from one donor. This is one of the largest donations we've ever received, and I get credit for closing the deal." "Really, I have a photo of this event." Sal added triumphantly, "Lawton said he's being promoted to Vice President of Development, and I'll take his place as Associate Dean. What do you think of that?" She sat smiling, very pleased with herself. My first thought was that my wife was mistaken, but I also understood. Sal is an ultra-competitive woman. Consequently, she convinced herself or was misled into believing that she was responsible for raising all this money. I continued to look at her blankly. Finally, she read my gaze and a cloud appeared on her face. I said sharply, "Let's talk about this at home." She looked puzzled, then annoyed. The walk to the stop and the ride on the metro passed in silence. I didn't want to talk, and Sal looked like she was trying to figure out what was wrong with me. When we got home, I gestured to our Ajay couch and said, "Sit down." I poured her a glass of Bristol cream and placed it in front of her. Then I sat down next to her, took her gentle hands in mine, and looked carefully at her beautiful face. She looked worried now. I said firmly, "Here's what I know for sure. You spent the night with Herbert Pullerman of Deep Harbor Holdings. My only question is, What did you do after that?" Sal gasped. Her usually dark face turned white. She pulled both hands away and placed them on her delicious breasts, just looking at me with wide eyes, open mouth. Then her head dropped. She didn't lose consciousness. She seemed to have withdrawn deeply into herself. Finally, she raised her head and slowly opened her eyes. There was only sorrow in them. She said in a plaintive whisper, "How did you know?" I had a photo with me. I threw it in front of my wife and said, "They put it on the website. It was tiny and indistinguishable from another photo, so you're safe. I found this because I was looking everywhere you could be, and I'm one of the few people who can dig it up." I added bitterly, "I wanted something I could tease you with. I don't think this is appropriate." I saw my wife trying hard to get ready. Sal is a strong man. She has the same pride as me. Finally, she said, in a voice trembling with emotion, "What do you want to know? I won't hide anything. I'll be honest with you." I said, "Well, my first question is how long have you and Fuller been planning this? I knew you were up to something when you kept me at a distance before you left. But how long has this been going on? I know that the asshole would gladly make a cuckold of me, but when did you agree to betray me?" It was cruel, but deserved. My wife's head shook back as if I had hit her. She said, shocked and in tears, "That wasn't true at all. Lawton was the one who handled Pullman. They were in and out of our office all fall working on the deal. Lawton planned to close it at the summit." I nodded. Okay, that made sense. She continued tearfully, "Lawton told me that Pullerman is a womanizer, but he's especially attracted to me. So I could grease the gears if I just dressed sexy and flirted with him a little." I interrupted in a sour tone, "And of course you didn't want me there because my presence would have held you back." She sobbed and said, "Yeah, but I never intended to do more than just flirt, maybe let him have a little liberties while we danced, you know. I knew I'd be safe because Millie covered for me." She added, starting to cry, "But Millie wasn't there when I arrived." I said, "Fuller called Millie on Friday morning and told her that her services were not needed. We both wondered why he did that. Now I know. He wanted to remove your safety net." I slammed my right fist into my left palm and added angrily, "That bastard planned all of this." That's when I decided that Fuller was going to have a very bad time. Sal continued softly, but her voice was full of indignation. It was as if Lawton had made an agreement with Pullerman in advance. He was fat, loud, disgusting, and completely smug. Even worse, he acted as if he owned me from the moment I arrived. I knew that Pullerman would also have unpleasant surprises in the future. He could be rich and privileged in this world, but this is not the only world in which he lived. Sal said, completely disgusted, "Herb was all over the party. I put up with it because Fuller told me to play along with him. Both of those guys kept slipping glasses of champagne at me, and I lost track of how much I drank." She stopped, gave me a pitiful look, and said, "You don't need to tell me. I know I was set up." She made a sad face and said, "I don't remember much after that, but I do remember him taking me to the couch. As soon as we sat down, he grabbed me and kissed me. I tried to push him away, but he was much bigger and stronger than me." My wife stopped and added in a trembling voice, "Then I lost control." She said, embarrassed, "You have a photo of what happened next." I knew this would happen, but it still felt like an electric shock. I said coldly, "How many times?" Sal turned pale, but she promised me the truth. She said, "A lot. He really was a selfish pig." She finished, cringing. When we went to the room, I was no longer drunk. My seething rage must have broken through the stony expression I was trying to maintain. Sal winced. She looked at me with sadness, smiled bitterly, and said, "This is the sad story of my fall. I am so sorry." The last one was said with hope in his voice. I didn't want to upset her, but she left out several important details. I said with a sharp tone, "What happened on Sunday? You were in no hurry to return home." Instead of feeling uncomfortable, Sal looked outraged. She said indignantly, "Saturday was hell. I woke up with a terrible hangover. Herb was still asleep, snoring like a boar. I grabbed my things and ran to my room. Thank God no one saw me." Then she looked at me with concern and said, "I stood in the shower, just crying. Then I pulled myself together, got dressed, and went to the conference. Herb acted all morning as if we were sharing an intimate secret." She stopped and added sadly, which, apparently, was the case. Herb continued to pester and try to hug. My wife winced and added, "Everyone saw it. I was completely humiliated. I put up with it until the afternoon because I still had a presentation and I just couldn't make a scene. After that, I told Lawton I was leaving." I laughed and said, "Let me guess. Your boss threw a fit." Sal smiled sadly and said, "I told him I'm tired of being touched, so I either leave or break a couple of Herb's fingers, your choice. The last thing Lawton wanted was problems with the donor, so he finally agreed." Sal added, "His only condition was that we meet on Sunday to discuss strategy for completing the deal." Sal's face contorted in disgust as she said, "And I was stupid enough to believe him." Sal gathered her courage and said, "We agreed to meet at 10 o'clock in the lobby bistro. He didn't show up until 10:30 and stalled for about an hour, talking about all sorts of little things. When Herb walked in at 11:35, I realized that it was another ambush. I butted in angrily, 'Let me guess. The lover said he'll donate the money to the university if you give him a little more.' Sal said, 'Something like this. His words were that I amazed his world and he fell in love with me. By that point, I was so disgusted with him.' She stopped and said, 'No, no. In fact, I was disgusted with myself, that I just exploded at them.' There was a moment of sharp pain before I realized she wasn't talking about group sex. This reaction further reinforced how terrible it all was. Sal said, 'There was only one way for me to get them to leave me alone, so I told them I was considering filing a non-consensual complaint if Herb didn't leave me alone.' She added angrily, 'They both laughed at me. They said no one would believe it wasn't consensual. I told them my claim might be hard to prove, but I'll scream about it until I smell it. Won't cover both of them, and he will stay with them for a long time. They are both married, which would at least attract their attention.' Sal stopped and looked at me sadly. She said, 'Lawton then indicated that you would be the one who would suffer the most from my accusations. His exact words were, "I can't wait to see how the cuckold deals with this." So we all agreed that Herb would donate the money like he promised, and I would pretend nothing happened. I told Herb that I would tell my story in the Boston Globe, or better yet the Inquirer, if he tried to reach out again with me. You should have seen the expression on his fat face. I said, 'Okay, even if I believe you, and I think I do, there's still an hour or so of unaccounted time left.' Sal gave me a tired smile and said, 'On the way home, I was just sitting in Fresh Pond, trying to work up the courage to act normal. The last thing I wanted was to make you suspicious.' I hated disappointing my wife, but I felt like we were no longer on the same page from the moment she walked in the door. Our connection was so strong, and yet I believed her. It sounded so true. There was no guile or guilt in her account of Sunday's events, only anger. No one can portray such real emotions so believably for such a complex story. I felt the rage flow out of me like steam from a steam engine. Sally did it, but she took responsibility for it. Moreover, there was no mens rea guilty mind. I was absolutely sure that my wife did not intend to do this. I didn't know what to think. Sal was instructed by her boss to give Pullerman the girlfriend experience of playing along with the man, indulging his ego. You can judge the morality of this any way you want, but the intention was clear. She never thought about direct sexual contact with Pullerman. It was obvious. However, Fuller manipulated my wife to such an extent that Pullerman could take advantage of her passionate nature. In fact, he could even teach the fat man how to do it. So they both used Sal's innate desire to win along with lots of champagne to break down her defenses. I was sure that Sally was not attracted to Pullman. I mean, seriously, who could be attracted to this fat body? But Fuller told Sal to make Pullerman happy, so my wife reluctantly played her part to close the deal. I was sure Sal thought she was just doing her job. Flirting is a skill that all women possess, and a stunningly sexy woman like my wife should know every trick in the book. But she had to get into character, so to speak, to make it believable. So she took the drinks and let the man touch her all for the sake of $26 million at the end of the rainbow. The problem was that the alcohol and stimulation took Sal to a place she never expected to be, and she reacted in a way she never expected. Sally might have felt surprise or even fear at first when Pullerman crossed the line, but her desire was high and her defense was low. So it's no surprise that she fell down a magical rabbit hole into the land of unconscious sexual bliss, where all consciousness is immersed in pure sensation. Of course, none of these rationalizations changed reality. Our old marriage was over. An intense sense of loss saddened me, but I said firmly to Sal, "Thank you for your honesty. It shows how much you love me. But there is no way to continue our lives as if last weekend didn't happen." I paused for effect and added, "That man will always be in the background like an uninvited guest at a wedding." She nodded bitterly. I used to love her. She loved me. But I couldn't accept that I was now partner in crime with Herbert J. Pullerman. Sal began to cry quietly. I added, my voice full of darkness, "Our marital bond disappeared when you let that fat bastard have sex with you." She cried out, "But I love and want only you." I said quietly, "I believe you, but there is no marriage without exclusivity, and our relationship is no longer special, is it? I won't be able to make love to you and not imagine you with him. It's impossible." Sally howled and jumped forward, wrapping her arms around my neck and burying her face in my chest. She cried, and I said into the top of her head, "I've been thinking about this all day, and I want you to know that I still love you and want to be with you. But I think the only solution is to separate. We need to find each other again." She stopped crying and raised her head with hope written on her beautiful, tear-stained face. She said, "I'll do anything. What will that involve?" I moved her so that she was looking at me, sobbing adorably. I said, "I've thought about this from every angle, and the only solution I can see is to separate. Then we will live our lives as if we had never met, with the understanding that fate will bring us back together if that's how it should be. I suppose the new generations would call it karma." I was surprised at how absurd it sounded, even to me. Unfortunately, I knew this was the only way out. We needed a complete reset. Or, as they say, I should have let Sal go. If she came back to me, it was meant to be. If not, well, then I'll have my answer. And yes, I knew that it was completely crazy to let the love of my life back into the dating pool, hoping that we would find each other again. I mean, Sal already broke down once under the old regime. However, I couldn't just accept her betrayal. This was a problem I couldn't solve. So the only viable option was to place a bet and let fate decide. I didn't yet know how this risk would pay off, but I will accept it as an undeniable judgment of fate if we end up together again. I may be a scientist by profession, but honestly, deep down I'm as superstitious as a medieval peasant. In fact, I think we all are. Seriously, I truly believed that blind fate leads us to some unknown final goal, so I was ready to place my bet and let the capricious bitch spin her heavenly wheel where it would stop. I didn't know exactly. I would understand if you thought I was crazy. The concept of meeting and marrying my current wife is truly strange, especially when there are more traditional options. For example, kick her out and change the locks or bury her in the yard. However, I still loved Sally, she loved me, and our old union was irrevocably destroyed, killed by terrible circumstances. So what choice did we have but to try to build a new relationship from scratch without Herbert J. Pullerman? Sal sat there thinking about what I said. I saw her considering all the consequences. Then she turned to me and said hesitantly, "What will the rules be?" I said bluntly, There are no rules. We shake hands and go our separate ways. Then we live our lives as if we had never met. I expect to fall in love with a completely new woman." Sal winced, then realized I was talking about her. She looked at me pleadingly and said, "Isn't there another way? I will do everything to keep us together." I hesitated, so maybe I should have been more reasonable and forgiving, but there was still a practical question of trust. As terrible as it sounds, I lost all confidence in my wife. I even knew why. Sal made herself vulnerable with her pursuit. Her need for achievement was an innate part of her character, so I didn't want to spend the rest of my life wondering if she would give in again, given the right incentive. In this sense, then, my mistrust would eat away at the fabric of our daily lives, unless there were radical changes in Sally's character. It became clear to me that we needed to create a new basis for trust, and the only way to do this is to completely destroy our old marriage, like an abandoned house, and rebuild it. But we could only do this if we separated. Therefore, in order to start over, we needed to spend enough time and distance from each other. Sal said timidly, "Does this mean you want to be with other women?" This made me very angry. I growled, "Do you think there is anything about our current relationship that is based on sex?" She looked puzzled, as if she didn't understand what I was asking, and then said, "Of course not. You are my life partner and my best friend. We cope with problems together and draw strength from each other. I can cope with life's difficulties because I know that you are with me. Without you, there is only loneliness, fear, and despondency. Our physical togetherness simply strengthens this absolute devotion." She looked me straight in the eye so I could see she was serious and added, "Sex to me is simply a consequence of being human. We all have sexual desires. This has nothing to do with marriage. This conscious physical commitment to each other makes it unique. If not, then sex is just sex. This is an animal matter." Then she added, feeling ashamed, "I guess some of us need sex more than others. But you know what I mean, right? Sex in marriage is nothing more than a physical manifestation of our love. This is tangible proof of our dedication. We make a conscious promise to ourselves to belong to each other. In this regard, abstaining from other people is a sacrifice that underscores our fundamental commitment." She added sadly, "I'm not that stupid. I understand what you are saying. It was this exclusion that killed us. I let a man into a place meant only for you. This is a fact, regardless of the circumstances. So I understand why you want to lay a new foundation." Like I said, Sal was very smart. The love of my life sat there, hope and sadness written all over her beautiful face. She said, lowering her head and looking at me through her thick curtain of hair, "There may be other ways to do this, but your plan seems the simplest, so what to do next?" She looked like she was preparing for the worst. I said, "The university owes me a sabbatical, and I'm going to take it. It will be next semester, in a month and a half. In the meantime, I guess we need to rip off the Band-Aid, because the longer we put off separation, the more painful it will become." I said sadly, "I'm going to find a place nearby where we can be seen together just to maintain our social pretensions." This included friends like Millie and Charlie and enemies like Fuller. My motto is, never show that you're worried. But for this, you need to be mentally strong. I knew Sal and I were strong and smart enough to handle this. I added regretfully, "I don't want the rest of the world, especially your creepy boss, to know we're in trouble. You agree?" Sal nodded sadly. It was still just the two of us against the world. I turned Sal's head to look her straight in the eyes. I said, hoping the intensity would convey my feelings, "I don't want you to think I'm vindictive. I punish myself the same way I punish you. I'm trying to get us back together in the only way that I think will lead to the right decision." She started crying. I held her to my chest and said sadly, "I love you." This doesn't sound like the words of a vindictive husband leaving home, does it? Well, damn it. Because in reality, I assumed that fate would make the right choice. It was just a matter of time. I thought I would spend our separation in the Cambridge area. But we both quickly realized that this was a terrible idea, since seeing each other every day was unbearable for both of us. We still missed each other, so we didn't have a friend zone to hide in. I needed to leave the city as soon as possible. We still met daily and commuted to work together. It was to make everyone think we were still together. Our business was ours alone. We were still two in this regard. We even sometimes hung out with Millie and Charlie. Sal was clearly living alone, like me, not dating anyone. And me too. I knew this for sure because my new apartment was just a few doors away from Sal's. So I would have noticed and heard if someone was visiting her, and she had the same number of visitors as I did 0. Sal and I spent our evenings alone, suffering in our self-destructive exile. We spent our days exchanging long glances, pretending to be a couple. We were still in the grip of our attraction to each other, which did not create the separation we needed, so we had to create a physical space. Sal had a full-time job. Therefore, it was I who had to leave. Sabbatical leave was my solution. I had not yet thought about where I would go and did not plan to move to Arles. But I've seen enough of this place while tinkering with my Van Gogh puzzle, and it seemed like the perfect place to wait until karma played its cards. The location was picturesque, with bright sunshine and warm Mediterranean winds. I thought that I could calmly wait out the necessary time. This would create an insurmountable distance between me and Sal, ensuring separation. The fact that everyone knew it was a gap year provided the perfect cover for why we weren't together. I've already dropped the mother of all nuclear bombs on Fuller and Pullerman. This act of revenge itself began to heal the festering wound they had caused. And don't get me wrong, I understand that retribution is an indirect issue. My real goal is to find a way back to my wife. However, these two idiots had to learn what happens when you interfere in other people's lives. Plus, there's something so cathartic about knife warfare. Hitting someone in the face is stupid. They heal in a week, and you get 2 to 5 for attacking. I wanted to give these two scoundrels a gift that keeps on giving. My hacking skills were the obvious way to deal with these two. I rarely practice my black art. It's a slippery slope. But engineering the Fuller and Pullerman collapse was such an easy task, at least for someone with my special abilities. Moreover, I had nothing better to do than to do this, because Sal wasn't with me. Pullerman and Fuller ruined my life. Ipso facto, I really wanted to ruin them. Then we'll be even. And yes, I know this is childhood, but it's so nice to indulge in a little Old Testament retribution every now and then. I started both first. This is Trojan remote access for you simpletons. My weapon of choice is Flautomy, which I bought with Bitcoin on the dark web. It was illegally copied from the source code of an existing system management tool, so it had all the necessary remote administration functions. The art of hacking lies in the pretext. Therefore, I needed Pullman's personal history to carry out the social engineering scam I had in mind. So I bought it for a measly $28, I might add. It gave me more information about the bastard's life than he probably knew about himself. And don't be arrogant, because both of us can be purchased on the same shelf. Then, using what I knew about Fatty, I sent him a fake message from his old Porcellian club buddy, Skipper McPhee. I mean, if you can't trust Skipper, who can you trust? The Trojan was hidden in steganography. However, I could probably put permission to install rootkit in the subject line, and he would still click on the message. People are idiots when it comes to things like this. Pullman opened the message at 8:48 am. My remote access Trojan took real control of his network as soon as he did this. A photo of him and Sal appeared on the screen, and a banner rolled across it, flashing, "You had sex with her, now I'm gonna have sex with you." I wanted to give Pullerman a hint as to who might be behind his downfall, otherwise the exploit would be pointless. Once the bastard activated the Trojan, its tentacles spread through all the devices on his personal and business network, even his smart TV and internet-enabled refrigerator. This is the beauty of the speed of light and the Internet of Things. Everything happens instantly. I was watching my victim through the Alexa portal when he crashed his laptop. The fool thought he dodged the bullet. He didn't escape. Even when he was hitting his poor computer, my spiders were looking for his financial information. It was sent to the IRS as soon as I found it. Meanwhile, I came across intimate details of his numerous harassment claims. This bonanza was leaked to every news agency on the planet. Ah, the dangers of the digital ecosystem. And I will never leave the comfort of my basement doing this. We, the inhabitants of dark places, count on your ignorance. It would be much more difficult for us if you ever took your head out of the sand, or wherever you keep it, and we saw how vulnerable you are when you go into cyberspace. As they said on medieval maps, hic sunt dracones. Here are dragons. I did the same with Fuller, who, thank God, had an extensive extramarital sex life. I suspected that he had something incriminating of this kind. Note to cheaters: don't record your day's pleasures on your smartphone. The question is not whether people like me can reach them. We can always reach them. The only question is whether we want to get to them. The bastard who took my wife to close the deal gave me some pretty good motivation. And in response to your naysayers, no, Sal was not featured in any of Fuller's juicy entries. But there were other women, some of whom I knew, and it was problematic because I was going to send Fuller's notes to all the right people. I downloaded a remote access Trojan via port scanning and forced pairing with his smartphone. This was a blue diving OBEX exploit. So to be safe, I wanted to be within 90 feet. So one fine afternoon, I visited Sally at work. I could bear Fuller's smug grin, knowing that his beautiful little Brahmin wife would soon see everything. As I walked away, I said over my shoulder, "You gotta think about me when really bad things happen to you, buddy." He looked at me with a puzzled grin. It was a moment of deliverance. Because I knew Fuller's world was about to change for the worse. Maybe I should send him a condolence card for his upcoming divorce. Were my actions excessive? I don't think so. Remember, these people's contempt for humanity caused the problem in the first place. And walking along the scorched earth after a couple of idiots is much more pleasant than punching them in the face. I doubted that any of them would learn from their experience or even connect the dots. But at least publicly condemning them will make me happier. Sally accompanied me to Logan on the dark day I left for France. She looked beautiful and sad as she stood on her tiptoes to kiss me goodbye. We hugged one last time, and I headed to the Tsa line. I looked back, and she was standing there looking at me. We exchanged sad glances, and then she turned and walked out. This was one of the many times I genuinely questioned my decision. I mean, there was no doubt that we loved each other and wanted to be together. So why should I go through this ridiculous farce of separation hiding in France instead of solving the problem? Well, maybe it's just me, but Sal's betrayal has created an irreparable rift in our world. Therefore, the only viable option was to move on. I didn't want to make it permanent, and neither did she. But we needed to take decisive steps to destroy our old life and build a new foundation. I didn't know how to do this, so I hoped that time and distance would give us the necessary perspective to address the fundamental question: can we fix this? Thus, the only reasonable option was to postpone the decision until a solution emerged. My flight was from Logan to Charles de Gaulle and then to Marseille. From there, I took the SNCF train to Arles, and it was an easy walk from the station. Honestly, packing up and leaving was the hardest thing I've ever done, but the stakes were too high to simply give up. I was determined to be strong, even if it meant a ton of separation anxiety. The one-room apartment that I rented online was located on Rue d'Ursuline. It was a bright and sunny Provençal day, and everything looked clean and tidy. The street I lived on was classically French, except that it was dominated by a real Roman Colosseum. This structure was so large that at one point the entire village lived inside it. Therefore, it was difficult not to notice her. The house was a traditional French two-story stone structure, crammed into a row of similar buildings. There was a liquor store on the ground floor, and limestone steps led up to my apartment. My landlord slept in the back of her store, underneath the apartments above. She was an imposing older woman. Madame Defarge demanded 3 months' advance payment and a deposit, which would have been more appropriate for renting a room at Versailles. She wasn't friendly, but she wasn't hostile either. What you got from her was outright greed. It was somehow calming, knowing exactly where you stood. The apartment had a large window overlooking a tree-filled cul-de-sac surrounded by other buildings. The room was clean and tidy. It had a fairly large bedroom with one bed, a chest of drawers, and a wardrobe. The only other room was about the same size, with a couple of easy chairs and reading lights. Along one wall, there was a small stove, refrigerator, and sink, as well as a small bathroom with a bathtub. After he joined me, Buster slept on the mat out front. He weighs 120 pounds. Therefore, it seemed that there was another person living with me. But the old man provided confidence and security. Big dogs do this. And the landlord only charged me 50 euros a month for having it. It was expensive, yes, but like I said, predictable. The days passed in a monotonous sequence. I did my morning chores, and then Buster and I walked to Brasserie La Fission, which was just around the corner. Or we went to Café de la Paix, a little further down Rue Voltaire. We enjoyed our petit déjeuner and watched the tourists walking by. Arles is full of Roman ruins, and they attract tourists in droves. Academic leave is something special for academics. You won't understand this unless you are one of us. It's like paid vacation. The only condition for receiving it is to conduct research and publish while you are on vacation. Fortunately, there is such a new thing as the internet. So every day I sat in a street cafe, sipped good red wine, enjoyed the beautiful Provençal days, and worked on my laptop. I was not Van Gogh creating immortal art, but the concept was the same. Both Van Gogh and I created something tangible from what we saw in our imaginations. Van Gogh's eye was sharper than mine, and he was certainly more productive. But of course he was a genius. And I was here mainly to find out what fate had in store, and in my opinion, Quesira Sira is not the worst way to solve problems. The nights were the worst. Thoughts of Sally never left me. The idea of her living the life of a single girl in Boston just tore my heart out. I was trying to create an emotional fireproof barrier to build a new marriage. So I had to let Sal have her time free. I knew my grand gesture was a risk, but I didn't think through the consequences. Now these chickens were returning home to roost for the night. Naturally, divorce would be the only option if I found out that Sal had spent our time separated from another man. I know I told her that I would be calm about it, but my reptilian brain wouldn't accept any part of this stupid idea, which shows how liberal and strong-willed I really am. Teenage, of course, but you can't argue with your feelings. I avoided cyberstalking. I could keep an eye on Sally, but I was afraid of what I might find. I was not emotionally prepared for fate to drop the other shoe, especially when I was 3,600 miles away, self-exiled from my daily life. My first visit to Sal's Facebook page strengthened my resolve. She posted photos of a university event on the Charles River. It was innocent and should not have caused the fit of insane jealousy that it did. But the sight of my beautiful and sexy wife in casual clothes, smiling in a duck boat surrounded by our friends just killed me. I constantly had to remind myself that it was my idea. Was I ever thinking about diving into the dating pool? Well, Arles is full of beautiful women, and I have received proposals. The problem was that I was here to repair my marriage, not just get my needs met. Plus, once you've tried steak, it's hard to go back to hamburger. However, my academic leave was ending in a month. This was the time when the wheel of fortune would stop spinning and my number would come up. Maybe it's the looming deadline or the growing anxiety about what I'll find when I get home. Be that as it may, the truth hit me like Paul did on the road to Tarsus. In fact, the answer was so obvious that I actually said out loud, "What an idiot I am." Think about it. Regardless of what your Puritan ancestors told you, sex is neither moral nor immoral. This is an elementary consequence of being human. Therefore, the oath to renounce all others is not an innate canonical truth. It's a social artifact meant to reduce grudges and bar fights. And by the way, so that all your children are yours. Moreover, this is exactly how the Judeo-Christian culture, which is highly patriarchal, views it. The concept varies across cultures. For example, among the Great Plains Indians, it was considered basic ethics to offer one's wife to a nocturnal guest. It is not right, not if you are Indian. There are also places at the other end of the scale where catching a woman cheating can get her stoned to death. Of course, the man slides because, what men are like. These countries tend to have the term shithole in their description. But it does not matter. The point is, how you feel about cheating depends on where you are. So let's be realistic. Your attitude towards sex outside of marriage is nothing more than what your particular culture wants you to believe. These ideas are valid within your specific social context. But marriage has no expiration date, and God willing, there's plenty of time left after you're too old to have sex. Therefore, there must be a more fundamental and practical reason why two people enter into a lifelong union. Therefore, I accept that exclusive sex is part of the equation. But that's not the real long-term outcome. To me, the most valid justification for marriage is that humans have never been the strongest creatures in the jungle, so we need to work together to survive. This instinct was built into our species when we came down from the trees. Seriously, if you look at the entire span of your life, the vow to fight through all dangers together till death do us part is the real reason for two people to be together. Romantics call this devotion. This means that you unconditionally agree to take care of each other, no matter what the circumstances, for the rest of your lives. This was an important question for Sal and me. Ambition is usually seen as a positive quality. Sal had a lot of ambition, and Fuller used that, with the help of some demon rum, to betray her. As lawyers say, this exposed me to ridicule and contempt. Yet that was never Sal's intention, and frankly, I don't give a damn what that bastard or his bastard friends think because they are bastards. Did I use enough of the word bastard to get my point across? So the only real question was whether Sal and I were committed enough to each other to face these inevitable difficult times without thinking about our personal well-being. If I had proof, I knew I could put my wife's momentary weakness behind me. And that was the exact moment when karma intervened. One fine March night, a mysterious disease appeared in Arles. The site dates back to the Phoenicians. That's why it saw everything, from the Antonine Plague to the Black Death. So the ancient stones of the Colosseum simply shrugged and said, "Here's another one." I knew people around me were getting sick, and I was a little afraid of germs, so I avoided crowds. But one guy at the next table in the Arena Cafe started coughing violently, and a couple of days later something nasty crept up on me in my dreams. I woke up shaking and trembling to the point where I could barely control my body. I was coughing like the guy in the cafe, I had a headache, and I felt like I was about to go to the toilet. I stood up to go to the bathroom and fell to the floor, too weak to stand. I crawled to the bathroom and back on all fours. I then covered myself with whatever blankets were available and lay in the fetal position, shivering. I knew that I would die alone in a foreign country, without anyone to ease my suffering or witness my departure. I was overcome with fear and sadness. The emotions were so strong that I did something I swore I would never do. I started crying. My last words as I lost consciousness were, "Sally." There is pain, and then there is what I experienced. I can tell you what hell is like because I've been in its darkest corner. I don't know how long I lay there in horror and suffering. I remember a couple of periods of darkness. It must have been night, but I was too out of my mind to realize much. Then a cold hand touched my forehead, and a quiet voice said, "It seems that the temperature has subsided." I opened my eyes and immediately closed them. Daylight was painful. I opened my eyes and saw two people in the room. Buster was standing behind them, looking worried. The one who just touched my forehead was a woman, the other was a man. Both were wearing surgical masks and gowns. They must have been local doctors. The man said in heavily accented English, "Just continue to look after him as before. He needs to stay hydrated, and the medications will lower his fever. Also try to get him to eat something, maybe soup. I'll visit him tomorrow." The nurse's voice said, "Thank you, doctor," and the footsteps disappeared from the room. I was half dead. But the idea that the woman had an American accent was strange. Buster sat looking at me, communicating in this amazing dog way. He tried to tell me that everything would be okay. It was comforting. Dogs know these things. I woke up much later, feeling a little better. From the shadows on the wall, I realized that it was already evening. A quiet figure sat in one of the soft chairs, reading. I said weakly, "Could you get me some water?" The figure jumped to its feet and ran into the other room. She returned with a glass of water. I drank greedily, trying to figure out who it was. She was wearing a mask and robe, like everyone else, to protect herself from the plague. Therefore, it was difficult to see anything other than her beautiful eyes. Those eyes reminded me of Sally, and the sharp pity almost did what the disease had failed to do. I said weakly, "Thank you." I was going to ask my guardian angel for a name, but drowsiness hit me like a cement truck, and I fell asleep again. I woke up on a beautiful Provençal morning. The sun was shining, and I felt much better. The headache disappeared, the temperature subsided. I still had a racking cough, but I could breathe freely. My mysterious benefactor was walking around the other room, and I heard Buster walking with her. On the bare floor, he sounded like an elephant. She was cooking something that smelled delicious. As I tried to get out of bed to join them, the room began to spin, so I lay down again. Buster heard me and came over. He looked like an anxious old Frenchman with wide-set eyes, a wrinkled forehead, an upturned nose and jowls. I could almost hear him say in surprise, "Monsieur, you woke up." Then my savior snuck past him. She hummed a familiar tune and carried a large bowl of soup. She had a mask on, but there was no doubt about those eyes, that hair, and that gorgeous body. My heart jumped out of my chest, made a couple of high-speed circles around the room, and ended with a delightful turn. It was Sally. Without saying a word, Sal ran up to the bed, sat down on a chair, scooped up a large spoonful of soup, blew on it, and brought the spoon to my mouth. She said in a conversational tone, as if the situation was the most ordinary thing in the world, "You should eat this. It will help you regain your strength." I was so excited and stunned that I opened my mouth like a baby bird, and she put this comforting soup in it. She continued to feed, and I continued to eat, and soon I had eaten the entire bowl. During this completely strange period, not a word was said. But there was no need for this. She was here, and all was right in the world. After she put the bowl away in my small sink, she came back and sat next to me. I extended my hand to her. She took it with both hands lovingly and sat looking at me with a "what should I do with you" look. My mother looked at me this way often when I was growing up. Finally, I said, trying to sound casual, "Not that I'm complaining, but how did you get here?" Sal responded just as casually, "I was nearby, so I decided to take a look." This was so typical of us. Neither of us ever wanted to appear too serious. Continuing our latent mating dance, I said, "Well, I'm glad you came because you saved my life." My wife laughed and said, "No, it was actually Buster who saved you." "Buster?" Sal said lovingly. "Yes, Buster knocked down the door and went to warn that gloomy French woman that you were in trouble. You have something called COVID. It's a global pandemic." I could imagine Madame Defarge's reaction when, after many loud noises upstairs, the hellhound appeared on her doorstep doing his best imitation of "Timmy fell down the well." She could try to slam the door, but Buster pushed past her and then pushed her up the stairs, constantly slamming his wet nose into her saggy ass. It was Buster's way of moving people. Madame Defarge called Sally. She had Sal's number because she insisted I give her someone else's number in case I ran away. Sally did the rest. She was already on the Eastern flight that evening and was making arrangements to save my life the very next day. My wife arrived in the morning, and by noon the ambulance service at the Joseph Imbert Hospital was already dealing with my case. They had a lot of patients, and I was not in the high-risk category. That's why they sent a doctor to my home instead of hospitalizing me. The doctor decided that I was not in critical condition, so he told Sal to care for me at home. He gave Sal all the necessary instructions and medications to reduce her fever and pain, left her protective equipment, and promised to visit her occasionally. Sally then sat heroically at my bedside for the next 48 hours, caring for me through my worst period. It was not lost on me that she also risked her life doing this. As I thought back on my thoughts about marriage, I wondered, would I do the same for her? Undoubtedly. This was a question that did not require an answer. I could get to Sal's bed even if I had to row across the Atlantic. It would be without hesitation. We were devoted to each other. It was obvious. It was strange. We were in a foreign country, in an unfamiliar place, and I was recovering from a fight with the Reaper himself. However, it felt like we were under a cozy blanket of familiarity and deep affection. The catastrophic events of our past paled in comparison to the grave danger from which Sal had saved me. Reality was different now. The decision of fate was made. Sal was her usual energetic and witty self. But under this mask, she has changed. Sally became more confident. She became deeper, more thoughtful and contemplative. My wife's easy intelligence and self-confidence turned into a new personal strength, a view of the world without the previous pretensions to achievement and success. Like me, Sal was thrown into the fire pit of separation, and at first it left her rudderless. She just sat at home and remembered the good times. But Sal also analyzed the qualities that made those good times possible and discovered the personal flaws that led to her downfall. Sal realized that she had lost sight of a basic truth. Maintaining a good marriage trumps all other responsibilities in life. She said sadly, I measured success with the wrong measure. I had to put in equal effort to ensure the success of our relationship as husband and wife. I get it. Most people are too inexperienced to think much about the future when they get married. I mean, men don't look at a hot woman of the opposite sex and think, this woman has excellent long-term potential as a life partner. Instead, they marry based on a combination of physical attraction and how well the other person matches their current interests. Only then does life come, red in tooth and claw careers, children, midlife crises, and all that. During this time, the two in a marriage must adapt or fail. The problem is that adaptation requires recognizing and accepting the need to grow and develop the marriage together. Of course, being willing to do this requires these two people to be completely committed to each other's well-being. This is what loyalty means. However, life's demands can distract from that, and, damn, your spouse has always been there, so you assume it will always be there. This is a very naive assumption at first glance, because the conditions that brought you two together will inevitably change, and you will become different people. Therefore, it is necessary to consciously adapt and grow together. Otherwise, people get carried away by new and more compatible partners, or the marriage falls apart from boredom, like a deflating balloon. Boredom was not a problem for Sal and me. However, we should have paid more attention to the possibility of seduction. Being smart and reasonable, Sal did not believe that anyone would ever be able to maneuver her into a position where she would betray me. That is, until it happened. Sal's assumption that she was immune to any kind of sexual conquest was arrogant of her, but it was understandable. She had been fighting off suitors since she came of age, and on top of that, Fuller was her boss. He was familiar. Regardless of the situation, there was no chance that my wife would ever give in to him. Maybe Fuller got some kind of voyeuristic pleasure when someone had sex with Sal. Or maybe he just wanted to cuckold me. Whatever the explanation, it went right through Sal's defenses because she didn't realize she needed to hold them. The result was the destruction of our old marriage. It was a painful lesson, and Sal clearly learned it. So it's time to begin the slow process of rebuilding better, stronger bridges. My recovery was measured in weeks, not days, and Sal needed a place to sleep. I only had one bed in my small apartment, and it made sense to keep me isolated. So Madame Defarge kindly rented us another apartment at an exorbitant price, of course. She was on the side of the Colosseum, which was neither picturesque nor joyful considering that the giant structure was blocking the sun. But Sal only really needed her at night. She spent the rest of her time with me. She woke me up to give me medicine. Then the three of us, Sal, me, and Buster, spent the day together. Buster, being mainly French, was a real ladies' man, so he did everything except kiss Sal's hand every time he saw her. Then he followed her wherever she went, like a cute puppy. panting and slobbering. It was funny. Sal said, "I think your dog is in love with me." I laughed and said, "Of course he's in love. He is French." I was in the recovery phase where I could go for short walks, and the weather was perfect. So we would walk to the Brasserie des Erins or Café de la Paix, sit at outdoor tables and talk. I felt well enough to discuss the only important topic, our current status as husband and wife. As a way of approaching this difficult topic with caution, I asked, "Did you just drop everything and move away?" Sal looked at me as if I had asked the stupidest question in the world and said, "Of course, COVID was all over the news. I knew you were in great danger, and you are my husband. I had to come to you as quickly as possible." I said, "But didn't that cause problems at work?" She said, as if she couldn't believe I was so stupid, "I repeat, you are my husband. Who cares about work?" Now, this was a new element in my wife's personality. I said, "What did Fuller say about it?" Sal smiled slyly and said, "He was fired for cause a month after you left. His wife's father is on the board of trustees. It appears the old man has obtained some very incriminating videos documenting Lawton's moral failure. They took him out of the office in front of everyone." My wife added playfully, "And Herb Pullman is facing federal charges for tax fraud. He wanted the university to return his gift to cover its legal costs. But that became impossible after his Me Too scandal went viral." Sal added with obvious satisfaction, "It looks like there were a lot of harassment claims that he paid to hush up. Therefore, the university felt justified in keeping his money. They are clearly not going to name the building after him as he planned." I thought, wow, 26 million is a lot of money for one night, even if it was a night with the hottest woman in Greater Boston. Sal stopped and said mockingly, "You have nothing to do with this, do you, bad boy?" I looked at her like an innocent baby and said, "You can think whatever you want, but I can't comment on it. I've always wanted to use that Francis Urquhart line." Sal laughed so loudly that she scared Buster. I said, now completely puzzled, "If Fuller is out, then who is your new boss?" Sal said in a voice that didn't match her words, "I am." She looked awkward and unhappy. I said, "Well, congratulations. This is what you've been striving for since we met." Sal said sadly, "I almost gave up. I knew how I got it, even if no one else did, and to be honest, I'm still thinking about leaving." It was amazing. Has the angel on her right shoulder finally won the arm wrestle with the devil on her left? It was another sign that good things were to come. Then my wife stopped and added sincerely, "If this promotion means ruining my marriage, I'm seriously considering finding a less high-profile position somewhere where I can contribute to society." Of course, those last words ensured that our marriage would survive. My only concern with the last Sal was that she was too driven. If this version was thinking about giving up her dream because of the possible impact on her marriage, she changed radically. So I took her beautiful little hands in mine and said, "That will never happen." I added mockingly, "We've only known each other for a couple of weeks, stranger. But I think I like you. Maybe we should move back to Boston and build a life together." In court, a crime always remains a crime, but the circumstances leading up to the crime and the behavior before and after it dictate the sentence. I was sure that Sal was not planning on having sex that infamous night, but Sally is a very sexy woman, and her nasty boss sold her to Herbert J. Pullman to make a business deal. The fat guy pressed the right buttons, and my wife behaved like a woman of easy virtue. This momentary failure was what condemned her, but Sal realized what she had done and took steps to correct the situation. This was on her own initiative, long before she was discovered. More importantly, she was open and honest after the discovery. Sal made no excuses. She accepted my terms and treated our situation with dignity and respect. There were no complaints, no pleas, and she bore the burden of our separation without fanfare. Finally, and I don't know why this was so important, Sal remained faithful to me while we were apart. I understood that she had an endless number of possibilities, and yet she remained faithful. I hear you say, I doubt it. Well, besides the fact that I knew my wife, she is a terrible liar. I also knew a lot of other people, each of them was a gossip. They would gladly tell me if they even doubt that she had a secret boyfriend. I mean, what's the point of coming here if the people back home are going to blow up your story? Sal was far from stupid. Sal told me that she knew she needed to control her overwhelming need for achievement and her traitorous urges. That is, if she wanted to stay married. So that was her only goal during our separation. More importantly, Sal and I were now in completely different circumstances. Giving up everything to care for someone who had essentially left you was a testament to her commitment to me. But that still didn't decide how we would return to everyday married life. We broke up for a reason, and although the equation was balanced in favor of restoring our marriage thanks in no small part to Sal herself, it took a painfully long time before we returned to normal married life. In particular, although we lived together, we did not have sex. This was especially difficult for Sale given her fiery personality. However, sex was the original cause of discord, and it was a place where both of us could not go yet. I used to love her. She loved me, and we quickly restored the habits that married people have. But it seemed like Herbert J. Pullerman would show up and turn it into a threesome whenever we started something. I couldn't get the obvious images of her completely surrendered to this man out of my head, and it was causing too many thoughts in my head. So instead of just doing what came naturally, I started thinking about every noise and movement she made. Then it built up to a critical mass of uncertainty. So instead of enjoying her amazing sexiness, it was almost as if I was standing in a room with her and Pullerman, taking notes on her performance. Sal looked understanding and determined. She said, "Thank you for telling me this. As for me, I understand what you think about how I was with this terrible person. And my dominant emotions are self-loathing and guilt for what I did, not sexual hunger and desire for you." She looked at me with an intensity that you could almost feel and said, "We are both very smart. I know we can overcome this. That is, if we make the effort. I want to go back, turn off our brains, and make love. We both think too much." And that's exactly what we did. I was lying on the bed in my pajama pants when Sal came out of the bathroom. My wife was wearing only a mysterious smile. She was simply great. You could see the strength in her lower body. Sal had exceptionally muscular thighs, flanks, and legs. Her torso and arms were less powerful, but they were perfectly proportioned to those feminine hips, and they radiated grace and elegance like the ballerina she once was. Her breasts were full and round, without the slightest sag, even in her mid-30s. But her glory is her exceptional face, framed by that thick hair. At the moment, the face had the same expression as a hungry lioness, and then, in one explosive leap, she ran across the space between us and did a cat leap. I actually said, "Phew." This took me by surprise, and so I didn't have time to think. And yet, the inevitable eventually happened. I said, "It cast out a lot of demons." She muttered sarcastically, "You think so?" I wish I could say that what happened that night immediately made us whole again. But this is the real world. We continued to have our moments, but we worked on them patiently because we loved each other. And when the fat ghost of past failures reared its ugly head, we played catch-a-mole until it went away. Now our love is mature, and the confidence in our unity made everything we sacrificed to achieve this seem worth the price. After all, maybe happiness just requires knowing what you want and persisting to get it. I can't honestly answer this question, but I know our lives were infinitely better because we persevered and persevered together. Dogs must be kept on a leash in the Boston Public Garden, especially dogs like Buster. I almost had to get my old buddy a green card to bring him into the country. Customs officials don't take kindly to 120-pound French tramps who like to wallow in filth. But Buster was with me as I walked along the path next to the pond. If I put a mane on it, it would look like I was leading a lion on a walk. I carried my little angel in the front baby backpack. She was delighted with the ducklings at the Boylston Street entrance. She screamed, "Ducks," every time I walked past them. I didn't have the heart to tell her that these were bronze statues. I may have read Skip the Ducks to her too many times. Jane Austen Bryant was quite an unpleasant surprise for a couple of committed, childless careerists. Neither Sally nor I knew that the pill had a fairly consistent 8% failure rate. Seriously, what does any guy know about women's technology plumbing is incomprehensible, so we were both amazed when fate threw us one last surprise. Ah, fate, you are a real bitch. Sally began regularly leaving her morning muesli in the toilet. Of course, we didn't know what was wrong with her, so we rushed to the emergency room at Mass General Hospital. There, the doctor cheerfully informed us that, instead of being stricken with some terrible disease, Sal was awaiting the arrival of the stork. Our double income placed us in that rare circle of wealthy yuppies who inhabit the popular bars of Greater Boston. We went everywhere and did everything. Because we had no real obstacles, we could cater to every whim: travel, events, fashion. Therefore, the news that the child would make us three was greeted with despondency rather than joy. We even considered getting rid of the pregnancy. But Sal was 36, so it's now or never. Plus, there is always something primal between mother and fetus that argues in favor of the child. We discussed it as we always do and finally decided that we had gotten over the cheating. So what's so difficult about children? And yes, I can hear all you parents laughing at us. Pregnancy was normal. Means psychotic mood swings, strange desires, and the need to urinate 10 or 12 times a day. Sal said it felt like a dump truck was parked on her bladder. You could almost guess that the birth would be easy. Sal's body was perfect for the most fundamental female function: wide hips, powerful ass and legs, and large breasts. By the end, my beautiful wife was walking like a fat duck. But she still went to work every day and never lost her sense of humor. The trip to the hospital, naturally, was in the middle of the night. But the birth was relatively short and easy, and little Jane was the perfect tiny person. I was in the room with Sal when she called me very hurtful things while squeezing my hand. My God, the woman was really strong. After the birth, I walked over to the table where the midwife was cleaning our little joy. Jane was telling the universe that she didn't like being pulled out of a place where the temperature was perfect and the food was constant. I said, "Welcome to the world, little one." I swear she immediately stopped announcing her displeasure and focused her huge brown eyes on me. She then solemnly extended her hand to take my finger and began criticizing the quality of service again. I looked at this angelic little being holding my finger with her perfect little hand, like a lifeline to the future, and I thought, this is who I am willing to die. The connection was absolute, instantaneous, and for life. There was no decision-making process. I knew this from the depths of my soul. I was surprised. So this is what fatherhood is. Now we had two selfless careerists trying to learn how to be parents. The first 3 months were like a death march to Baton without any of its fun moments. It almost seemed like they were finishing the connection in Jane's brain. Sleep was a concept that Sal and I had lost track of. The only thing that kept me from falling asleep at work was the fact that I was standing behind the podium. Sal was a support throughout. She cared for little Jane with the same determination with which she had previously pursued her career. I wonder if this was hardwired into the female psyche, or if my wife decided to handle motherhood just as well as everything else she had ever tried. But my wife was devoted and loving, and she was the center of our existence. Sal's actions were an exceptional combination of natural determination and intelligence applied to another purpose. This was proof of one simple truth, that smart and caring people will evolve as their circumstances change. There was no greater proof than Sal's insistence that we have another child immediately. The last thing we wanted was for Jane to grow up alone. So as soon as Sal got back into shape, we started trying to have another baby. It was a pleasant job, which was one of the reasons why I took my precious angel to see the swan boats. I wanted to take some of the pressure off at home, where Sal and her mom were struggling with newborn Elizabeth Barrett Bryant. If you are minimally self-aware, you will understand that raising children involves two people, not just the mother. And the reward is that you have a tiny companion who thinks you are the most amazing creature in God's world. My little Jane just turned 2 last Friday, but she was already becoming a source of joy and entertainment for her old man. Children are wonderfully portable if you use a little common sense, and watching Jane react to her new world made me want to take her everywhere just to experience the wonder through her eyes. She was already talking and walking, and her strength of character and independence were more than vaguely similar to someone I love more than life itself. So, if you're wondering, what's the moral of the story? Yes, my wife betrayed me one dark night in Berkshire. And yes, we reached that famous fork in the road, not knowing where each choice led. This could lead to green fields of everlasting love or a bitter landscape of anger and misery. But we made a choice, and we made it work. Together. That's all that matters. What I learned from this is that you should never underestimate fate's willingness to write a new and better chapter. And man's basic character will ultimately give him the end he deserves. Sal and I were two decent people who wanted what was best for each other. And we deserve to be happy. God, I love this woman. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one.